You're listening to the Feral House Podcast, a semi-regular discussion of books with the authors who wrote them.
Hi, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Feral House Podcast. Our guest will be with us in just a moment, but I'm taking a few minutes just to talk about, Feral House for a second. One of our favorite projects that we worked on many years ago was with Tim Wiley on the Process Church and that history. So it was a twinned project of the history of the Process Church with a lot of their great materials and Tim's firsthand memories of it. Tim's sadly no longer with us. And then the other portion was a hardcover, very rare edition of a kind of a collection of the best of the Process Church magazine. Last year we did an updated version, soft cover. You can see it's got the metallic hot stamp and it full color. We also, for fun, we've long offered a replica of the Process Church ring, but then we added, so you can actually, I brought mine down so you can see it in action and the sizing and stuff. It just fits on your normal kind of black belt, black being the preferred color of the Process Church. And these are available from Feral House on the website, as are copies of the book. Why am I pitching this book? Well, it goes along with an upcoming release in April, and maybe out by the time you actually see this, which is called Lucifer's Power. Lucifer's Power by William Bainbridge. Bainbridge is the guy who wrote the 1975 classic Satan's Power. In Satan's Power, it is his anthropological study of the Process Church, but it was current. It was the Process Church was still active at that time, and so many of the names of everything are been anonymized. In our new edition of Lucifer's Power, which is the title that Bill wanted for the book in the first place, all the names are revealed with the asterisk of if folks are still alive. We just let those be. And also, Bill has updated where the Process Church is today. What did it evolve to? What did the belief systems evolve to? And that is a really incredible book because if you don't know William Bainbridge, you should take a look at his body work. The man at post 80 years old has energy and ideas, and his brain is incredible. Read his book. He also wrote for us a few years ago a book called Revival, which is essentially his very educated imagining how the Process Church structures and beliefs would be very applicable and effective for folks today. So, if you're thinking about embracing the systems of the Process Church, Bill's going to show you how. And that's in Revival, which was from 2016, pretty sure, and upcoming or 2025's Lucifer's Power. I'm coming back to the Process magazine collection book is something that's happening right now for us and for many publishers is that costs are going crazy right now. Much of the printing industry, especially for color printing, is in China. And with the new tariffs against China, as well as against Canada, which is where all the paper comes from for the print industry, prices are getting really ridiculous. So much so that we're having a hard time keeping books in print, especially full color books. And not because we can't, but because these costs are so high for us to reprint them that we would have to charge you so much more money that it's just not fair. So we're going to ride this out a little bit, and you may see a few books go out of print and limited quantities available. Feralhouse.com, our home website, will always be a source for you. So if you can't find it at your local bookstore, somebody can't order it in, try us, because we always keep kind of an Aladdin's cave of our own books in stock. So holding up this one again, Process Church, it's limited and it is a full color book. We may press pause on reprinting this one. And so if this was on your to be read list, on your acquisition list, I suggest maybe moving it up to the top because there may be a day that it is not available even from us. Know that if we ever have to put a book out of print, due for whatever reasons, is we do keep it in print for as an ebook form. So you can always purchase a copy of the ebook from us at any time. And that's directly from our website, pretty reasonably cost, except for any of those Bezos deals. We don't do that. Pretty straightforward. Um, Again, thank you for listening to the podcast and enjoy our conversation coming up. All right. Hey, good afternoon, everyone. It is another episode of the Feral House podcast. And with me today is an artist, an actor, a writer, a director, a multi everything artist, but mostly for our purposes today to talk about his written work. So with us today is the author of Cold Glitter, and it is the untold history of Canadian glam. So please welcome Robert Dayton. Hi, Robert.
Hi, Christina. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's so much fun to do these because we've been working together for the past few years to make this book a book. And it's a long process. And so I get to know the writers I work with and I get to know the material really well. So it makes for a really interesting conversation because we're two insiders. We know this stuff. But of course, you know it better than anyone else. So, of course, the first question that I've been getting from, other publishers and a lot of music writers are like, what the heck? Canadian glam music? I had no idea. So give us, Robert, a little bit of overview of like, what are you calling Canadian glam? And how did this idea get started for you that you needed to document it?
Oh, for sure. I mean, with this book, Cold Glitter, the untold story of Canadian glam. So there it is right there. So it's so blatant, untold story, Canadian glam. It's not covered. It's like, was this a thing? And sometimes you notice with certain so-called movements and stuff, it's called a movement after the fact, or it's given a label or a ribbon and a bow after the fact. And some of these acts might not have seen themselves as glam at the time. Some of them definitely very much did. And some of the acts that didn't see themselves as glam may actually be more glam than the acts who did. So there's this set of qualifiers that I've loosely followed. And glam is a very slippery genre. Glam in general, you go from, say David Bowie, who at times didn't think he was glam, to Slade, to Sweet, to T-Rex, it does, Steve Harley, it moves around a lot. It's fairly hard to pin down. So what do you got there? Well, you have some qualifiers that you might not fully put into play: makeup, performance, apparel, costume, or outfits, I should say. A camp sensibility, and these acts may use all or only a couple of those types of things. So all of these acts in this book have that. And when I started on this project, I really thought, okay, it's not going to be the over 400 page tome that it is, and it is. It's over 400 pages. It became a giant project, and it was an exciting project because and when I've heard this recently, someone was saying that it was hyper niche, and I'm like, well, my thoughts are, you know are Sherlock Holmes books only for detectives who smoke pipes? Are serial killer books only for serial killers? This is an exciting thing that's not really been fully documented before. A lot of these acts have not had their stories to tell. I mean, have not been able to have their stories told, I should say. And they're really exciting, interesting stories. So if you have, even a marginal interest in music or Canadian culture, you'll find these stories exciting. Even if you don't, if you want to read about something that feels like a parallel universe, as it were, where you're reading these fascinating stories across this giant landmass, who also made really, really great music. It's music that really needs to be talked about. And so we could have another Neil Young book out there, when it comes to Canadian music, or we could have this that hasn't been fully explored before. So why don't we get this? Why don't we read this that's fresh and exciting and new? It's a fresh book about a history from 50 years ago.
It's one of the elements that caught my eye because one of the questions I get asked all the time when people encounter me in the public is, how do you pick a book? How do you decide what books you're going to publish? And while Cold Glitter is definitely Canadian and about this Canadian scene, I see the universality of every person who's been in a band, who had those dreams, who's driven a beat up car with, to a basement club and plug in and play their music. And that to me is a universal story, that kind of that story of an artist creators working to just get their art out into the world. And that's really what appealed to me about it as an American. And that's why I think other American readers will find that. And as you mentioned, I thought that's a great way to say it too, is a parallel universe of all of that stuff. Because so many, when I was reading through the manuscript, I recognized some of the names, but maybe 20%. Most of them I did not know at all. And so it was a really fascinating discovery. I found myself reading it and then going to YouTube and then trying to search out and then listen to a few songs. And I was like, oh, this is great. So this leads me to this question, Robert. And again, this is based on your research and what you think. So I won't hold you to it from like an academic point of view. But why do you think that during the time period when a lot of these bands were creating, which was the 70s and 80s, what prevented those songs from being heard on American radio? Why didn't we hear these bands?
There's a lot of factors, and it is interesting. Like, we know what a Big Mac tastes like. For the a lot of us know what a Big Mac tastes like. But it's where it's like, do you want more of the same, or do you want, why do we read books? Of course, to be engaged, to learn. And so, if people don't know about these acts, well, they're going to learn about them, and it's meant to engage and not be daunting at all. To find out about these. I want you to know about these exciting acts. And one of these acts, say, for example, Mac. We talk about the road stories of bands, as you said, but Mac, they've got all these other factors too. So Mac was out of Quebec, and they traveled all the highways and byways. Canada is massive, so I describe how they have to go on this erratic touring schedule to these small clubs, and in winter. So we have horrible adverse conditions. So we got a spread out landmass, adverse conditions of winter, snow, difficult driving at night, and as a result, they lost a band member. He died, and the band changed after that, because they weren't just an average band as well. They were a band that wore costumes and makeup and all that stuff, as glam bands would do. They were really putting on a show. So they weren't your average band strumming away. They were trying to put on a show. And so this music too has its visual sensibility as well. It carries over into the music. And, the Canadian music industry didn't really have great distribution channels as well, for the most part. And so this Mac album, they mostly, which is, the album that came out as a result of this compromise following the death of this band member, the album that came out, they mostly sold it at shows. They sold it from the stage. So that's just one case in point. And, some of these other bands didn't get a lot of airplay. Some did. But, a lot of it was, some of it was DIY. Some of it was Canadian labels. There were larger Canadian labels, but it didn't get so much out of Canada. When we read certain books, for example, that are about, other scenes in other countries, and to me, Canada is just as valid as some of those other scenes. But we pick up a book about Japanese rock music, for example, a lot of that is like, oh, I'm thinking, say, for example, like the Jap Rock Sampler by Julian Cope. You open it up and you go, oh, there's this whole world out there that I, for example, didn't really know about. And maybe that's I don't know why that would be constrained by geography? I'm not sure.
Yeah,
The
I'm
borders
not
of a
sure
nation state?
either. I'm not sure either because I mean, and it's that trope. There's even that great independent record label called Secretly Canadian. I mean,
Hmm.
it's the trope of how many Canadians um, come to the US to further their careers because they don't have opportunities in Canada. And yet, because of just the strange makeup of both of our countries, the United States and Canada, of having this colonist immigrant background. So our demographics are very similar. So Canadians can live among us, unseen and unknown. And so that idea that there's someone is secretly Canadian, as well as that you have to leave your home to be able to create your art, really, and have it known, is something that to me is very it's an interesting thing to when you think about someone like Nick Gilder, Ryan Adams, Mike Reno, it just essentially having to lose their Canadianness to become stars. Did you, when you're interviewing, and you interviewed so many of these bands and these musicians, did you get a sense at all in that was actually a huge decision for people to make of like, do you leave Canada behind? Do you leave your home to try to go and make it somewhere else?
Excuse me. It's tricky, I mean, I think sometimes there's just fumbling, there's not, what is, if you don't have this certain management, and even if you do have certain management, do you have this guidebook that tells you what to do in life? The guidebook of what to do in life. I mean, I know that I'm perpetually just fumbling along in life, and sometimes having to leave Canada to ultimately do it. Absolutely. Where you have to get out of Canada. Um, there's been an old joke, and I wish I could remember who told it, but it goes back to the 1950s, where it was an old joke that I read in a 1950s Canadian humor book, and the crux of it was that Canadians only saw something as good or valid if the Americans accepted it.
Ah,
So it's otherwise, Quebec's a bit of a different story because for various factors, they're very proud of their culture, and it's also a lot of French language. So it's
mhm.
very supported. The film, the music, it's very supported in Quebec. But then outside of Quebec, in Canada, this stuff isn't known. So this Quebec, all this great Quebec culture, a lot of it isn't really known outside of Quebec.
So just to be clear, then, so for the Quebecers is like so the French people, they didn't get airplay on Radio France or anything like that. It was very, you're saying,
I don't know
isolated
if
to
I can
Quebec.
speak to that. Like, I have seen I don't know the specifics of that. I mean, I've seen certain things where, say like Robert Charlebois is playing, is on some, talk show in France, uh, with Serge Gainsbourg, in the 80s. So I think there might have been some crossover there. But I'm not sure of the specifics of that, or how that was set up. I do know, for example, that Much Music, which was a great music video channel that happened. God, when did it start? Late 80s, maybe? In the
I
80s. It started
remember
in the 80s.
I'm old. I remember that. And I remember it being actually much cooler actually and better than MTV. Much Music broadcast a more diverse selection of bands and more obscure bands to outside of like pop music, which is where MTV was. So, if you were going to watch something, the cool kids, we liked Much Music better.
Yeah, it was. They had more of a vision. Moses Neimer and Denise Donlin had a real, who ran it. They had a real vision for how Much Music would be. This kind of open concept uh, type thing going on, where the studio felt very open. And before that, Moses Neimer had started City TV, which had inspired Videodrome, the movie Videodrome. That and Marshall McLuhan had been the inspiration for David Cronenberg's Videodrome, because they aired a lot of racy stuff late at night. So he had a certain amount of vision as a TV head, a network head. So with Much Music, they also had to play a certain amount of Canadian content. So there were laws, I guess it would be called CRTC, uh, where there were laws where they had to play this certain quota of Canadian content. And I feel like Much Music before before it was bought and sold or whatever, I think Denise and Donlin and Moses Neimer in the '90s, they were no longer a part of it. But that first bunch of years of Much Music, they probably would have been all for playing Canadian stuff anyways. So there were a lot of videos from Quebec that I would see up in northern British Columbia as a teenager and go, oh, okay, so.
So it leads me back to like the discovery part of the book. And of course I'm speaking as an American, which is then, as I mentioned, like reviewing even the manuscript then the first time and looking up some of these bands. Um, and I was blown away. I'm a glam fan, so that was an easy sell for me to like want to learn about new glam bands. So if you had to make like recommendations kind of for Americans specifically to say, if you like this glam band, which Canadian glam band should you listen to? So if someone's a fan of the Sweet, what would be a great Canadian glam band for them to check out?
Oh gosh, I mean, it's tricky. I would say how I would frame it is the book works from the most western part of the country. So it's a you know we so wonderful book designer Bill has made a nice map of Canada, and you start in the most western point, and you start in Vancouver, British Columbia, where Sweeney Todd was, and that's the band that a lot of people think about when they think of glam in Canada, and often that's the only one people can, until this book, could probably come up with. And so there's the song Roxy Roller by Sweeney Todd. So start with that. That's a great place to start. And there's a and also it has the connection of Nick Gilder, who of course went off to LA to make it big, and then and then there was a singer for a couple months named Clark Perry, and then Bryan Adams, who kind of used it as a stepping stone to worldwide fame. So Sweeney Todd, Roxy Roller is a great place to start. It's got a bit of swagger. It's got that T-Rex sound, but it's slinkier. I would suggest that. So if you like Sweeney Todd, and I mean, if you like, forgive me, if you like T-Rex and the Sweet, maybe start with Roxy Roller. I
Okay.
think both their albums are amazing. Both albums are great. So both Sweeney Todd albums.
So that's a good recommendation. And of course, I can't help but notice, and I'm sure everybody else can't help but notice, you've got a Thor shirt on. And
Yes,
Thor
they look.
is featured in the book. And a lot of Thor, like many of the musicians are in their late 70s, early 80s. So, and so these are the creators were towards the end of their life. But Thor is still active. And can you tell us a little bit about Thor and just his story and what he does and what he's doing now?
Yeah, the book really starts with the early part of Thor's career, which to me is really, really interesting because you're seeing these elements come together. Of course, he loved comic books and loved rock and loved bodybuilding, and it seemed like he loved all those things equally. There was no there was no oh, I'm into bodybuilding, but I'll combine it with this thing called rock. No, he genuinely had a love of all these things. And so he was able to combine all of his passions and loves into Thor. And when he started, it was a bodybuilder band. He had a few bands before, and he also ties in with the whole burlesque supper club scene of Vancouver. There was a big nightlife in Vancouver in the 60s. It
Wow.
was a city of neon, and until there was like sight pollution laws that were in effect, it was a great neon city, and there were these great supper clubs like the Cave and on and on and on. And then there was one burlesque club. This guy, I think his name was Izzy Walters. I have to consult the book for some of this. Izzy Walters, I believe is his name, who designed Thor's early sequined outfits, and then he moved into John Michael Body Rock, where they were all like flexing and doing all their bodybuilder stuff on stage as a band in 1974 at this glam rock event. And Actually, it might be early. I have to check the data. I have to consult the book for all this stuff. I have to kind of go, okay,
Well, this is the point where
there's
I
a lot
go,
of info.
everyone, buy the book, buy Cold Glitter, or go to the library and check it out. We love libraries. Don't ever feel bad about going to the library to check out a Feral House book because it does actually help us because the libraries buy the books. And wouldn't you rather see your libraries filled with Feral House books? So, um,
And if
that's my little,
you can't, if your library doesn't have the book, ask them to get it in. Your
yeah,
library or bookstore,
absolutely.
they please bring it in. So
So the story of Thor, which again, what a great visual, and that's as you were talking about what makes what the campiness sometimes and some of the qualities that can loosely define um, what glam is then it leads me to think about this kind of the performance aspect of it and I think that anybody who's ever seen a live band in their life or many of them in a small basement show or a club that where there can often be a disconnect between the quality of the music and songs and the quality of the performance. I've seen a number of bands that put on a fantastic show and their
oh,
chops are terrible. So in the case of like some of these bands and was did they all come together where the performance and the songs were great or was there a lot of like the performance is fantastic but the songs maybe not so much.
you just made me realize something, and it's so key because I would go to a lot of shows starting in the 90s. And I loved that some of these bands would have a performance element, but their music was never up to snuff. I was like, wow, it's generic punk rock, but they're not. That's it. The music is really, really boring, but they've got these outfits, and that's it. And I'm going, why can't they be on equal par? And it was a common complaint for me, you know, seeing shows, and it probably was something that I really would try to factor in my own bands. I'm going, okay, the songs, there's got to be good songs. There has to be good material here. This is super important. It has to all work together. And so when I was making my own music, that was a real concern. It was a genuinely valid concern because I had seen that too much where it was just all performance, no material. So with a lot of these bands, like Thor, for example, even the early demos before he went and recorded the first album, the early demos are great. Do the Muscle, they're catchy, they're great. That first Thor album, Keep the Dogs Away, it's like a Kiss album, and it's but like a really good Kiss album. It's great. It's a great album. It's really really good, and there's a lot of other stuff where the music is really up to snuff. With Lynx, for example, which was like, if we want to get into the Kiss element, because Kiss does come up uh, as a factor in Canada. Sometimes is a little come lately, even though some of these acts were pretty early on. Some of these acts came out even before glam. I had the performance element before glam became a thing, but some of these acts were a little later. Where the Kiss was a little later in the world of glam too, but they clearly took the glam elements.
Mhm.
And so, one act was Lynx, and Lynx was marketed as Canada's answer to Kiss. And it was awkward, really, really awkward. The label kind of sent them for costuming and makeup and hair. And, it came out. I should just show a photo because it's just, and the description from Rob Swartz of the band, because I interviewed him, his description of what happened to them is hilarious, but also deeply tragic. So you have those elements of what happened to them being put into these costumes and makeup, but the first album really rocks. It's a great album. The music's
Wow.
great. It's
Well, and
phenomenal.
and I think that is also the universality.
Painted
I know it's
nipples. He had painted nipples. Yeah, they did that to him. Paper
I think
paper suit. They gave him an ill-fitting paper suit. That's Robert Swartz
yikes.
there, who was interviewed for the book.
Wow. So, but that also, to me, that universality of like even friends, in bands that I know, about how to fight back to protect the integrity of your own band. When you have, you have a record label finally interested, and yet they've got some marketing ideas that maybe don't jive with what the band wants or the image wants. And, it's that Sophie's choice, to overstate that, of do you wear the weird clothes that don't fit the band. I think of the Nick Lowe line, from his first solo album, of like the bass player wore sounds like clothes he wouldn't wear, essentially. um and I think that happens a lot with major labels, probably lesser so today, but in the 70s, that big band where the labels had so much power, that probably happened a heck of a lot more, from what I understand in the stories. Were there any of the bands that you talked to and you interviewed that were truly independent and pushed back, and they were just focused on creating their own sound, doing their own performance, and they were really insular? They just didn't want that label influence or anything like that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, first off, that Lynx story, because it is such a label story, it's a Canadian major called Quality Records. And that it's a fascinating story. It's a bit of a tragic story, and you see, the label changing the lineup of the band. So it's very fascinating, that chapter, Links. There's elements of humor there, but there's of course these elements of tragedy, because this is our chance to make it, guys, and then all of a sudden the band's getting changed. Um, yeah, it's definitely read that chapter. But then you have bands on the other end who are also in Ontario, like a band called The Dishes. Now, The Dishes are early 70s, and they're, of course, inspired by all sorts of things, but a lot of Roxy Music and Sparks. And, you know, these influences give them a real room to play, to be really playful and have their own vision and be their own band. So, as much as they had these influences, they were still very distinctive to do their own thing when there weren't a lot of bands doing their own thing. And, I say this, I love, the first Lynx album is a great album, and it's awesome. But then there's diminishing returns of following albums and lineup changes. The Dishes did it all themselves. They put out their own singles, and that paved the way for the punk scene. So they were basically playing this venue, and then the punk scene sprung up around them. And that happened as well with bands like No Fun in Vancouver, and other bands as well, where you see these bands are doing it themselves, and then a scene springs up later. But the Dishes didn't really fit in with the punk scene. They were too unique, so they were doing their own thing too well. They were arty,
Mm.
um, and their lyrics were very clever. So
And so, again, as a crutch for folks who may have not never heard the Dishes before, what band would be akin in that sound?
well,
Is there is there or is there one? Maybe there's not one.
I don't know if there is. I mean, I think they're my favorite Ontario band. They're definitely my favorite Toronto band, because they are so unique. And as I said, they had that Sparks and Roxy Music influence, but they were also more DIY. So it was slightly more slipshod. And the singer Murray Ball had this uh, wonderful, unique, nasally delivery. Um, yeah, and then they'd sing songs like "Monopolies Are Made at Night" is one of their song titles. So very clever songs. Um, you know, when I asked why they didn't, why they weren't fully accepted by the punk scene, even though they pretty much helped pave the way for that, one of the band members said, "Well, maybe we were too gay."
Oh,
So that could be it as well.
so
Uh,
was that an undercurrent? I mean, if we think back to the time period, we're talking now about, like, say, mid to late 70s, early 80s, punk influences, and we think about what queerness is today, and much more culturally accepted for the most part, not politically accepted, current regimes and all that. So was queerness something that the bands were And again, everybody's experience was a little different, but was it something that they were comfortable being open if it was more of a queer focused band or had queer members, or was it something that still that they were hiding, that they needed to keep closeted?
Well, it's hard to say. I mean, with the dishes, I mean, you would probably get different perspectives just from within the band themselves. So, and I did. So, the one band member would say, when I said, "Why didn't you make it?" They said, the one band member said, "Maybe we were too gay." But another band member said, "We weren't a gay band. There were gay members in the band." So, there's that element as well. And then you have an act like, say, Justin Page, where there's a lot of gay coding on his album, and you know, references to a place called the Parkside, which was, would it be a gay bar? Well, it was not gay owned and operated, but it was a bar where a lot of gay people would go. But however, there was also, undercover cops, so it was a very dangerous thing. But it
Mm.
was it was a hangout. So but also with Justin Page, he wasn't gay. Justin Page wasn't gay, but Joey Miller, who wrote all the material, was gay. And so, Justin Page would perform all of Joey's songs, and Joey was the keyboardist. And their management was also gay because they would go on to found Mac Cosmetics and take Mac Cosmetics to Wigstock with Joey. So in New York. So that's later down the line, of course. But
Hmm.
they had a love of the management and Joey and everyone. They had a love of glam. So, and Justin Page himself, though he wasn't gay, he was game. He was up for it. He was totally down to do it. So it is sort of a case by case.
Yeah, okay. Um, and some of these questions, no, no, Robert doesn't have these questions in advance. We're just having this conversation, so he's just volleying back whatever fool thing kind of comes into my head.
Oh, and then of course there's Rough Trade, who are also dealing with explicitly gay themes. Of course, Carol Pope is dealing with some of those themes in the music. So that's another example. So
Would that any if something was outwardly kind of coded as gay or that way, because Canada, if I understand, you know better than I do, of that time period, it was always kind of a culturally conservative country in the mainstream. Was that something that would have gotten potentially airplay, or would that have been something that kind of suppressed by the mainstream?
it's tough to say. One thing I found in my research of Rough Trade is that they were without a record deal for 5 years. They were extremely popular, really, really popular. And again, they also did not tour to rural areas. They saw themselves as much more of a cosmopolitan band. And, they were a big city band. And so, like Toronto, for example, where they lived. So, but they were really popular and they did perform late at night on the CBC, and there was a lot of that, but they didn't have a label until they performed at the Junos. So they performed at the Junos, which is, you know, always glibly referred to as Canada's answer to the Grammys. And that's the thing. That's a constant thing in Canada. Canada's answer to. So Canada is a country that reacts and doesn't act. So, sometimes some of these acts in the book are a bit reactive, but they mostly act.
Hmm.
And it is culturally conservative. So you're having these acts that are very glammy, very performative, and some of them are getting chased out of the small rural towns. And then some of them, like Rough Trade, weren't even playing those towns. So Rough Trade played the Junos. They played the Junos, and that's what got them a record deal. And they were told not to do a certain thing. I think it was a crotch grab, actually. And there was someone in drag performing. There was as well with the band. So, and it was aired live on the Junos. So it was, you know, probably it could have been shocking to some, but it's what got them their deal. So.
Wow. So I wanted to just move on just a
Oh, and
little
they
bit.
perform. I'm so sorry. I don't mean to talk over, but I should add this. The song they performed was High School Confidential, which became a hit. So that's how it became a hit, to answer your question. So, yeah.
No, that's great. I'm glad they had a hit. You know, but where I was going is to change the topic just a little bit. Anybody listening, now you've got an idea of some of these bands and the stories. And Robert did so many interviews, and the research is just incredible. And Robert's going to be talking about it in person, not just here between you watching he and I have a conversation. And so there's upcoming events, and the best place to learn exactly where and when you can see Robert and talk about the book is by subscribing to the Feral House newsletter. That'll be always the most up-to-date information. And of course, any Feral House social media. I'm better about the newsletter than I am social media because it's a bit of a cesspit. But we know that Robert's going to be in it's Toronto. He's going to be in Toronto. He's going to be in Vancouver. He's going to be in Montreal. He's going to be in LA. And we're looking to do something in New York as well. Is it big city
And New
focused?
York's
It
happening.
is. And New York's happening. So all of those exact dates and locations, we will get that information out there so you can see Robert. One of the things I think is really great is, at least I know the events in Canada, are some of these band members are going to be with you. Can you talk about just that a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. The I think the first event will be in Montreal at the North. I believe it's at the North Star, a pinball arcade, and so that will be on. Of course, can I remember the exact date?
Sorry.
Where's my planner? That will be at the end of April, and here I am. Here I am. Thank God I have a day planner because my brain is super foggy. Yes, that's it. Thursday, April 24th at the North Star. And there will be info through the newsletter and on and on.
Absolutely.
So some of the people are there's some of the people, they're really excited to be there. I say some of the people are really, I think they're all excited to be there. So Nick from Mac, Angelo Finaldi, who was in, he had done so much. He basically transcended Canadian glam by being an early act on Rack, Mickey Mouse label in England. So he went over to England and became an early act on that before some of these other bands on their label had hits. So including Suzi Quattro. So yeah, so Angelo's going to be there. Nick's going to be there, and then members of the band. Well, Pierre, who I haven't met yet, Pierre from the band Danger. That's how you say it, by the way, Danger.
Oh,
I had to learn.
Jose. All right.
Danger, aka, we would, I've been calling it danger, same meaning.
I would call it danger as well, but now we know danger.
So yes, and they were Quebec's second glam band, apparently, and then they became, as they stopped doing laundry on those grueling shows, they became Quebec's first punk band. So they were able to, and this album's amazing. Oh my God, it's very Dollsy, New York Dolls, and all those other influences because Polo saw those bands. Polo saw he would see them multiple. He saw like Alice Cooper on his first, not the first, but maybe the first. He saw Alice Cooper like 4 times in a row. So, he was really into that stuff and remembers when that, ground zero of glam, Hot Love by T-Rex played on the radio. So, Polo's such an enthusiast, and Polo just died. Polo just passed of cancer, and he even recorded a song days before he died, called The Grand Voyage. Wow. And so Polo can't be there, obviously. I asked him to be there, and he said, well, I can't. My death date is April 1st, and that was a specifically chosen death date. And, he was a consummate great musician and, rock star, but also has a real sense of humor, obviously. And, that's the thing about writing this book is the humor really comes out. When you interview someone like Polo, the humor really, really comes out. The book is meant to also be a very funny book because glam is meant to have a sense of humor. So Polo can't be there, but his brother Pierre will be there. And so I'm very excited about that. So
that's thrilling. And so in like almost in the major cities, you're going to have a few members of some of the bands that you talk about, you write about, you've interviewed are going to be, on stage. There's more of a panel discussion. So if folks are coming out, they get to hear Robert's research on the stories, but they also get to hear from the band members, the people who made the music themselves, which I think is always fun when you get to talk to the historian and the people who made the history.
Yeah. Yeah. Another person I'd asked to be there, Stanley Frank, who this was released on a British label. This is incredible glam. This is like a great glam song. And I found out that he had passed. So I was, capturing these stories before some of these guys go on to the next the
Yeah.
next stage.
And
So
it was very good. And Robert was so good to poke at me. And so we were able to make sure that Polo got a copy of the book and he was able to see it before he died, which
oh, he
I
was
know
so
that was
happy.
really important to you, Robert. And so I'm glad that we could pull it all together to make that happen. But I think this also goes to some of the larger thing of why write these histories? Why do this? I'm of the belief that this is important. Canadian history, arts history, music history is all told through the smaller stories. No, knowing the history of, say, some big megastar doesn't always give you a better understanding of the music and the art and how it got made. Whereas I think the smaller stories, and when you put those together, that really tells the story of a scene, of a movement. And so that's why I'm always thrilled to kind of get these kinds of book proposals and trying to get them out into the world. So, Robert, I'm going to go back to we're going to talk about process for just a moment. How long have you been working on Cold Glitter?
About a decade.
Yeah,
Yeah. I
yeah, that
started
was
it
a
about
load.
10
I
years
knew that.
ago.
Yeah. And these are labors of love. This is a labor of love, obviously. Now, did you go into it starting as a fan, or was it something that you're like, this is a thing I don't know enough about that I need to know more about?
Well, my oldest brother Frank, he had those Sweeney Todd albums. He was a hard rock guitarist, musician, really talented guitarist, and we actually wound up playing music together later on in my one project, July 4th Toilet. But we would play. But he was the older brother who would bring these records home. So I was raised on Sweeney Todd, and then of course all the non-Canadian stuff as well. But so that like Van Halen and such. So that started it, and then as time went on, I saw Thor's big comeback with Frank Soda joining him, stuff like that. So I was a fan of this stuff, absolutely. I did love this stuff and loved glam in general. And then this fellow Steve Krakow, Plastic Crime Wave out of Chicago. Steve was visiting Vancouver, and we were on our way to interview half of the Poppy family, who are not glam, but they're very much Canadian, and they made probably my favorite Canadian album, their first album. And so we were on our way to interview them, and for his magazine, Galactic Zoo Dossier. And he pulled out a Stampeders record. He went, "I like these guys. They're kind of like Canadian glam." And I went, "Oh, I never really thought of them that way before." And I like the Stampeders. I like all that stuff, but it kind of set something off. And in grad school, they said, "Well, you should write an essay on glam." And they said, and I said to them, "Well, how about Canadian glam?" And they went, "No, that's a PhD." So this is a
Well, Dr. Dayton,
yeah.
I appreciate the decade that you spent writing this. And if some university doesn't give you a doctorate for it, then they're fools, because the amount of research and attention Robert has paid to getting the facts right, getting the dates right, getting the people, talking to the right people, is extraordinary. And so people who read Cold Glitter, I'm confident that you're going to find bands that you love, new bands to you. And I think you're going to really enjoy reading these stories of these bands who were just working so hard to get it done and get it made. And I think, again, like I said earlier, it's a great universal story. So I have to ask now, what next? Are you working on what's your next decade? Are you going to write another book, or is this it?
Well, well, to backtrack, I mean, to backtrack, there is this universality, but it's also incredibly unique. I mean, you're not going to get anything else quite like this because a lot of these bands are going against the grain, or they're dealing with unique regional elements. So, there's all these, weird factoids and tidbits that come into play where you're like, what? There's real head scratchers. I mean, with Don J, this album was supposed to be in English, but their manager was a bit of a separatist, and he said no, record it in French. So there's the because of what was going on in Quebec at the time in the early '70s. So these political factors and there's all these things that went into it that made me go whoa. And so yeah, that part of that process wasn't just of course the research and also trying to be true to their stories, which are exciting stories, and conveying that excitement and making that excitement come across, but also trying to make it very writerly and make that writing be alive and fun. So, it's not a dry read. It's an informative read, but it was never meant to it's meant to be informative and fun. So
it is very informative. It's very fun. And we are very uptight, kind of sometimes tight about grammar. The copy editor, there were a few little contrepoint of like, we were fighting a little bit. But what you read is what Robert, wanted. So we fought for Robert's pizzazzamatazz, and that's been our favorite word to use around Feral House. Is we've been saying a lot of things have pizzazzamatazz. So thank you, Robert, for thank you for the new word. So, but are you working on anything next, or is it, I know that when I write, I need to take a brain break for a couple of years before I can even think about a new project. But, other people don't.
Well, I mean, with this being so in depth, with this project really, everything had to be accurate and just so, and research. As I said already, it involves so many elements. So it's like, I think the next thing I do next is like, I'm currently writing a humor book. I don't know what will happen with it, but it's a humor book about food, and it's just ridiculous stories that involve no fact checking, no research. It's just meant to be ridiculous and funny. So we'll see what happens with that. Another thing about just the idea of the hustle in LA as a Canadian in LA. There's that kind of a type of book that I've. So these are the things that I've got kind of kicking around in my brain, and they have been I've been typing them out a bit, but we'll see what sort of where it'll go with those projects. In the meantime, I'm also performing. I'm doing a thing called the birthday experience, where it's your birthday whether it's your birthday or not, which is a live performance involving a puppet and a clown and free cake and muse songs and stories. So I'm still performing and doing those elements too as a performer. So yeah, there's still.
And people can go to and follow you on Instagram and get your performance dates in LA and other places if you want to see Robert's extravaganza. There's no single descriptor for that aside from the performances are really wonderful, surreal. I've seen Robert perform in a few different kind of different performances that he does, and they're really fun. And they're also slightly, in my estimation, Robert, a little surreal. So if you like that stuff, which I think most Feral fans do, is definitely if you're in LA, go check out Robert. If you see out his name in other big cities, usually, definitely go check it out. Follow him on the social media if you want to learn more. One of the
Yeah,
things I want to address
the
is
Canadian Romantic, a character I do called the Canadian Romantic,
yes,
will be, and again, that's these two ineffables put together. How do you pinpoint Canadian, and then how do you pinpoint romantic, much like glam? So it's so that character that I do will be performing at a couple of these events as well for the book launch. So yeah,
fantastic. I love the Canadian Romantic. I was just laughing out loud when I saw it. It was just lovely and funny, and I just loved it. I highly recommend. Um, so I wanted to talk, just kind of end our conversation a bit on housekeeping, so to speak. Is I'm not sure. I did not predict. I'm usually pretty politically astute, and I did not predict that the United States would decide to go to Cold War with Canada in 2025. But because of some of these bizarre actions by the American regime, it's made it a little complicated for folks to get copies of Cold Glitter in Canada. I want to reassure everyone is we've got most of the bugs worked out. And so you can go to any Canadian independent bookstore, and if they don't have it in stock, they can order it for you. Um, any of the Canadian online retailers will have it for you. You don't have to order it from the States. You can order it in Canada and get it. The challenge, of course, if you try to order it from the States, from directly from Feral House, is we'll send it to you, but the postage costs. The postage to send a copy of Cold Glitter to anywhere in Canada is $38.50 as of spring of 2025. So I encourage you to support independent Canadian retailers and bookstores and order your copy of Cold Glitter through there. You will not pay that extortionate shipping rate, though you will pay a little bit more the Canadian price because of, again, all the political mishigas. It's a little more expensive than we hoped it would be for Canadians, but we hope that, again, it's something that you might choose to splurge on, and we would definitely appreciate that.
And also, it's over 400 pages. It's over 400 exciting pages, and if you look at some of the photos that are in the book, you go, hopefully you'll go, what the hell? I need to know more about this. So there's some wild photos. It's over 400 pages, and if your favorite bookstore doesn't have it, please ask them to order it in. I know, for example, I'm wondering, like in Vancouver, I know you can get it at two places in Vancouver, Canada, in Vancouver, BC. You can get it at Paper Hound, which is a wonderful bookstore, and you can get it at Neptune Records. And that's just off the top of my head. I'd love to name more bookstores that have it, but yeah.
But again, that reminder, and most folks know, if you're a Feral House fan, that we're internationally distributed. So again, if your local bookstore in Canada doesn't have it, they can order it in. Don't let them tell you otherwise. They have access to it. So as we wrap up, I want to just say thank you again. Thank you so much for spending some time talking with me about your work, Cold Glitter. We're proud to publish it. Really, truly proud to publish this one. And this will be one I keep talking about because I enjoyed reading it so much. I enjoyed discovering these new bands, and I'm convinced that everybody else will too. So thank you again, Robert.
Oh, thanks, Christina. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for publishing the book. I really hope people will pick it up and enjoy it. So
Yeah, they better. They'd better. That's all I'm going to say. So, all right. Thanks again for listening, everyone. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Feral House Podcast. Hi, I was going to take a moment and answer a couple questions that we get. I'm going to focus on one main topic that I get asked about a lot about Feral House, which is, where do you find your books to publish? What do you do? How do I get a book published by Feral House? Well, I'll tell you. First of all, write the book. A lot of times we'll get an email and saying, I have this great idea for a book. And it may be a very good idea, but ask anyone you know who's an author. And writing a book is actually a lot of work. I had a friend describe it as having homework every night for a year. So one of the things that I'm going to always look for anyone who's submitting a proposal for a book for it is, are you the person to write it? Are you an expert in this particular topic? Are you interested in this topic that you just devoted way too much time to researching this topic? And ultimately, can you write? We get a lot of submissions, folks, from just people who can't write. I'm going to be really honest with y'all. It's bad out there. And this AI stuff, I can tell. I don't need the machines. I can tell when you guys are using AI to submit. And have we gotten that? Yeah, I think some of you are joking with us and sending us in a few AI things. Um, don't. I can see it. It's not funny. It's just kind of silly. So it goes back to, how do you get a book published by Feral House? Well, first, have your good idea. And also start writing and start thinking about how you're going to present this idea. Because what's not interesting to us is just taking say, your dissertation, your master's theory, and just kind of publishing that. We're not an academic publisher, but we're really interested in these niche topics. And so many times people who are working in as an expert in their field and they're working on their terminal degrees, they have a book in that dissertation, but it's going to take a little work because, as well, we want that book to be for general readers, and that's all of us. I don't want to have to get a doctorate in a particular topic. I want to read about the work that was done, and I'm always interested. This is another reminder, too, that nonfiction, nonfiction, historical fiction is not nonfiction. Poetry is not nonfiction. Your novel is not nonfiction. Please don't do that. Please don't send us your stuff. Even if you think it's like, but it's an exception. It's a this, it's a that. No, it's not. It's not. Just don't. So please don't do that. The other thing to watch out for or to consider, pause, cut, pick up. Another element to consider is, what do we want to publish? Well, we've got some specific areas we're really interested in, and for all of Feral House. Again, I love subcultures. We always love subcultures. What is happening now? It doesn't always have to be a look back. What's the subculture now? What's happening? Are you the person that has your finger on that? Write about it. Tell me. Let us know, because other people are interested in it too. And conversely, strange little histories. There's actually an official term for it. It's called micro history, when you kind of focus in on a niche topic like that in a historical context. Micro histories, I love them. I love them. The weirder, the better. The other thing that many people will think we're going to publish, but more often than not, we're not, it's memoirs. What is with you guys? Everybody, and not you specifically, because you're a Feral House fan, you're watching this, you're listening. That means that what we're interested in is really someone who has an interesting life. Everybody thinks they have an interesting life. It's like, what does the kid say? It's that main character energy. No, Eugene Robinson, we published his memoir last year. That's an interesting life. Alice Bagg, that is an interesting life. Otherwise, your baby boomer memoir of how you once picked up, Dr. King at the airport and drove him 2 blocks. I'm sorry. No. If that was the highlight of your life, I'm so happy for you personally. Tell your grandkids that is not for us. The whole birth, work, life, death kind of memoir, cradle to grave, I don't care. I don't care about this. If you did something extraordinary, you were involved with some strange and extraordinary movement or group, yeah, I might be interested. Are you recovering from some horrific trauma? Everybody is. Get over it. You don't need to write about it. Stop. It informed your personal choices. And if you wrote about it in your journal and you got some therapy, fantastic. Leave it there. You don't have to write about it. Especially the one memoir I got submitted years ago. I'll always remember it because it's a reminder of how many secrets do you really want to share with people. And so when we've got a submission for a memoir about how a woman overcame her trauma by discovering her career in fishing and to give up her addiction to fisting, I'm really thrilled for her. I hope she's a good fishing guide, but no one wants to read your memoir. Please stop. Stop. Just stop. So send us your ideas, send us your books. What do you need? If you are a first-time writer, if you've never written a book, write the whole thing first, really. It's much more challenging than you think it is. And the big idea that you have when you actually put it into practice and hone it and work together and do those things, you really end up narrowing that focus a little bit. It's very hard to write the big idea. Some people do it very well. most of us are really challenged by that. Look, it's taken Robert Caro his entire over almost 60 years just to write about LBJ of all people. Um, you know, go bless. I we don't want that. We want you to um, share with us your obsessions and write about those and do that. And how do you do that? Info@feralhouse.com. Just send it to us. You don't need an agent, but you need to be able to, again, tell the story, be the person to tell the story, be that expert, be able to write. Please, everybody, work on your grammar. When you do sign with Feral House, we are what's considered a traditional publishing company. That means international distribution. We're not asking people to pay us. But at the same time, the industry itself is, if you have visions of becoming a multimillionaire because you wrote about, an odd little obscure topic, that ain't happening either. So you really do have to be passionate and really want to get all of that research out into the world. So please do that and send it to us. What really helps is if you send us a sample of like what you propose the table of contents could be. I want to see that. I want to see kind of what you're doing and what that book, how it's going to look. Send me at least a sample chapter, not the intro. People always make this mistake. They write the intro first, and then they write the book, and then the intro doesn't match anymore. I always say, save the intro for the last. Write your book first, then write an introduction. What you should do is send your sample chapter. Make sure it makes sense to me, that, I can pick it up if it's chapter 5. It's going to make sense. I don't need to have read chapters 1 through 4. Send me the chapter, because what I'm looking for is, can you write? Can you tell the story? And can you tell it in a really compelling way? I have confidence that many of you can do this. We're always easy to approach. Again, info@feralhouse.com. It's 24/7. It's there. Send us your stuff. We have a lot of folks. I'm out in the public, so you may see me at a book fair or a book event. And people want to stop and talk to me and talk about what their book idea is. And if it's not really busy and you're in, I don't mind hearing a little bit, but don't give me the whole spiel. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give you my card, and then I'm going to tell you to do those things I just said. Give me the table of contents, give me a sample chapter, tell me why you're the person to write this book, and definitely we'll consider it. I want one more thing that everybody should understand about how do you get a book published by Feral House is we see everything. We don't respond. We only respond to the email submissions for projects that we're potentially interested in, to just learn a little bit more. We are inundated with those emails. So we're there a couple times a day, just kind of skimming. When you need just kind of a little brain bake, you're going to go and take a look at the inbox and see if there's anything kind of fun and compelling. Have we published books from the inbox? Absolutely, we have. Yeah, sometimes we've gotten some really fantastic ideas and manuscripts through just our general info@feralhouse.com submission inbox. So it's not like we're ignoring it. So if you don't hear from us, that means pass. What does pass mean? Sometimes the idea is wrong. I mean, it's just not us. I've had some very bizarre kind of submissions from folks, and it's like, do you know Feral House? Have you read our book? Have you even looked at our website? And most times, no. So, yeah, make sure that you're on topic. If you're not on our topic,
Hey,
you're in our
fiends,
kind
thanks
of
for
wheelhouse.
listening to the Feral
We're not
House
gonna respond
podcast.
to that.
We do this about once a month, talking to
secondarily
Feral
is
House
if
and
it's-
Process
it's
Media
not
writers,
good
as well
writing,
as members of the
we
extended
don't
Feral
respond to
family.
that either.
You're
And
part of
then
the
there's
family.
also the
Let us
strangeness of
know if you have
sometimes
any
the timing is
questions
just
or
wrong.
if you have an
Just
idea of someone we
absolutely
should
wrong.
talk
And
to.
that's not on
You can send me
and
a
that's
note
not
at
really on us
press
either.
at
It's on the industry a little
feralhouse.com,
bit. And so because, as I
PRESS
said, we are a traditional publisher,
@feralhouse.com.
is that we have some rules we need to follow to keep going. We're not like many other independent publishers in the United States. We are not a nonprofit. We are solely reliant on our book sales, and that's you. And we're thankful and grateful for your support. We really appreciate it. Support doesn't always mean buying a book. Checking books out from the library is a great way to support us as well. So again, you want to write a book, you want to write a nonfiction book about a niche topic. do it. Do it. And then send it to us. And if we like it, you're going to hear it back from us. So again, thanks a lot for your interest, your support, and always feel free. Ask a question, and I'll do my best to answer it for you.